the book kicks off where Henry is investigating the murder of Mr. Ronald Rule, who I inferred is a reference to Ronald Rule Tolkien. And so I got a little...
Wait, what?
I got a little squinty-eyed at that, but I was wondering, because I assume that is actually what you're going for, do you have any funny feelings about killing off Tolkien? And then, did anybody have any weird feelings about killing off any of their characters?
I never have any weird feelings about killing off any of my characters because those people work for me. So if that's their role in the story, so be it. Naming that particular character after Tolkien, yeah, that was something that I did, but just because I always wondered what RR stood for. And I finally gone and looked it up a couple of weeks before I started writing that book, and then said, you know what, this sounds like something Tolkien would have been doing. You know, sure, he was the Summer Knight at one point, fine, I'll do that.
Just now found out what RR stood for.
I think that's the rule, Mark. Yeah.
Anybody who's or isn't.
What was the greatest writing problem you had with your last books? What was a scene or a character that you come back to over and over again? What was the ultimate scene?
This is for everyone?
Everyone.
I write perfect first drafts and I had to find a justifiable reason for restarting the Orient Express so I could kill someone on it and have everyone suspected. You know, and my God, that required some research, but I finally think I made it reasonably credible. And I got to look up the menus too. God.
I had two characters who really wanted to kill each other starting on page like 250, but they didn't get to do anything about it until 400, and I kind of had to justify that. And it took me a while to figure out. I knew there was a reason why they couldn't go at each other full bore for all those pages, but I hadn't articulated it in the book, and I hadn't figured it out in my head. And it took my agent pounding me over the head with, you know, this really feels like we're not killing each other because there are 100 pages more in the book, which is not a good enough reason. And so I finally worked that out by figuring out the loophole in the magic that was keeping them.
Alright, now I know there's a lot of folks in this room that haven't read my series, and that's cool, so I'm not going to try to spoil anything for you, but in book 3, well, back up. When I started book 1, I wanted to write the perfect urban fantasy television series. And I wanted the first 3 books and the first 3 novellas to be season 1. So book 3 is the by God season ender of that shit. So it resets everything in the whole Deaconverse, and everything is different after book 3. All the rules are out the window. You learn for real that it is a really hard place to live. And I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but there's a big thing that happens, and it was hard to write. It was really, really tough. It's one of the toughest things that most writers go through when they have a beloved character.
Agreed.
I had an interesting technical point with the villain in my 6th Geological Code Zero, which comes out next March, in that it's pretty obvious early on who the villain is, even though she's using a fake name. And I kept struggling with, did I really want to make it a surprise, or did I simply want to reveal that? And it wasn't until I was about 3/4 way through the writing that I realized that what I should do is simply explain how the person that became that villain, how they became the villain. So I wrote a series of flashbacks that explained how that happened. And that became what my editor said is my best villain. So instead of trying to make it a mystery, I simply chronicled the moral decay of the character. And by the way, that book ends with that character releasing a zombie plague at DragonCon.
lizard in the middle of fairyland, and I couldn't figure out how to either bring him back to our world or get rid of the little bastard. Because either one had to make sense, and I was like, I don't want a 4-foot-tall talking lizard in the next 2 books. I've got to figure out what to do with this little bastard. Or rewrite the entire book to get rid of him. So I had to figure out how to get a 4-foot-tall talking chameleon laid.
The strangest porn I ever heard of.
Follow that, Butcher.
As far as problems go, I usually outline pretty heavily before I start writing, so I don't usually run into like structural story problems as I go along. It's more just a question of how I want to present the different things, the different elements of the story that are going in. And a lot of times the hard part, okay, God, I'm lying to you completely. I was going to say the hard part is like what I do to beloved characters like Molly. That's not hard, that's just deliciously fun.
I'll hold him down.
This was the last book, and I'm not revealing anything here this long, yeah. Somebody asked me earlier this year in an interview, Jim, why do you like to torture your characters so much? And I said, I don't like to torture my characters. I like to torture my readers. There's just the characters happens to be the best way to do that. So that's my handle. I haven't really had a whole lot of issues with that, especially because I've kind of had this on the board for so long. I've kind of worked through the hard bits. The only things that can be problems are when I forget something, and then one of the beta readers will usually catch that. No, you killed that character. Oh, right. She's actually 5 years older than you thought, so she can't still be in high school. Oh, yeah, okay, you're right. Okay, I guess we're going to change that around. Yeah, exactly.
For me, like Jim, I outline all the time, so my books are all like completely plotted before I start, so I don't have how do I resolve this issue. But the Dan Shamble books, they're all first person, and there are lots of limitations to telling a big, complicated story through the eyes of only one character. In the most recent book, Hair Raising, there's a big scene at the end where there's a rumble between 2 different werewolf gangs, and one of the gangs unleashes a bunch of wild cockatrices. Cockatrices, because they run an illegal cockatrice fighting ring. But cockatrices, if you look at them, you turn to stone. So Dan Shamble has to catch them, but he has to be blindfolded. And his ghost girlfriend, who won't turn to stone because she's a ghost, is running or floating along next to him saying, go left, go right, watch out for that pothole, and trying to write that scene in first person with the character who's blindfolded and make it interesting. But this isn't like a film, you can't show it, it's in the character's head. That was a writing challenge, but it's funny as hell.
Is cockatrices the plural of cockatrice?
In my universe, it's cockatrices.
Your world,
This is primarily a question for Jim, but I am thoroughly interested in everyone else's response. I'm not like it. Writing characters like Harry Dress and Michael Carpenter, they're human at the end of the day. How do you get into the mindset to write for people like Queen Mab or Uriel or Mother Winter, creatures that are so far beyond human that their point of views get a little evil?
Very Lewis Blackians. Well, to a degree, you say they're so far beyond human, but at the same time, they aren't. The characters who are like that, like Mother Winter, as an example, is somebody who, while she is this sort of cosmic level player, she doesn't have the same sort of confusion and the same sort of free will that a human being has. That's kind of carried on through lots of the Dresden Files. Is the more powerful you get, the fewer options you have open to you. And when you go that far up the chain, you've got somebody who is very obsessively, very maniacally focused on whatever it is that they're focused on. Which makes it kind of a lot easier because they're not as broad a character to write. It's when you get down to characters like Harry Dresden or like Murphy or you're really, that's much more of a challenge. For a character like that, all you really have to do is give them some good props and make them creepy enough and understand their, very, really kind of basic psychological underpinnings to somebody like that. Because they don't kind of have that same moral gray area. They're doing what they're doing. It's kind of I just kind of write them like I'd be writing a Greek god. Not terribly complex, but hideously powerful.
You've all written other things than urban fantasy, so what is it about urban fantasy that you think you can get more out of? Like, whenever you're writing fantasy, you have to kind of focus on, explaining this alternate world and the customs that are unique to it. So what does this being set in our world really open up for you to focus more in on? What does it help with, or what does it narrow for you? I can try and.
Gave me the opportunity to write in my hometown. Gives you a chance to use characters from the same cultural background, so that you don't have to really project yourself into alien personalities. Of course, some of the characters are hideously evil by their nature, but that was easy. You just get down with your bad self. Writing characters who are better than you, that's difficult.
With the contemporary urban that I just sold to Bain, it's just fun writing in the present and not having to worry about using anachronistic language or anything like that, being able to use colloquial language, being able to use swear words, being able to just talk like normal people today do. With the Thief Taker books, the fun part of it was taking known history and finding a way to blend my magic system and my fictions into existing historical circumstance. That was a challenge, and it was also tremendously fun.
I know for me, writing in urban fantasy, writing in today's world skewed over to Monsterville, I don't have to worry about the details of world building. I mean, you've got it. If I tell you that I'm on a highway, you know what a highway is. If I tell you that I'm in a high rise, you know what a high rise is. If I tell you I'm in an apartment complex, you know what that looks like. So that frees me to be able to do stuff like put in were T-Rexes and were spiders and blow up the masquerade and do anything I want to this world. Because it's urban fantasy, I can throw in any influence, any monster that I want. And you can't tell me I can't do it because it's urban fantasy. So I've had a lot of fun playing with that. I did witches that are in the Hammer style of horror films. Were T-Rexes, like I said, was the big surprise in book 2. Which if you haven't read, I'm sorry, it's been out a year.
And for me, it was really an opportunity to write, cross-genre stuff, which was a big thing, but also noir. I wanted to write a PI mystery for quite a while, but my project schedule didn't have that hole in it. But it did have a hole for an urban fantasy story. So I decided to just simply indulge myself and do a noir PI story that happened to be urban fantasy. And I went up loving the character and kept wanting to return to it. So it really allowed me to write a couple of different things at once, and have some fun doing it.
For me, I started out with long form fiction in urban fantasy, and starting from that understood framework and being able to use those shortcuts with the reader, allowed me to focus more on character and my plotting and other structural things. It was something I didn't have to do a whole lot of work on because, like James said, you know what a highway is, you know what a car is. So it was something that as I was working on the books, I could focus on character and plotting and making sure the story was cohesive without having to really sweat that leg. So it helped me. It was a crutch I was able to use as a writer starting out, and it's also what I read. So it's the genre I love to read.
Mostly what I like about being able to shift over to writing urban fantasy is I can use Google Maps. And that makes my life so much easier. You know, I need to find a setting, I can go to Google Street View and find a setting. Right? I've been doing that. I was doing that today while I was getting a scene set up. But yeah, I mean, I wrote a short story where Michael's daughter gets kidnapped by a misguided priest, and I actually was in Chicago talking to a member of Chicago SWAT, who said, you know, I went and looked at that, and I need to know who you talked to, because the way you were telling me that, the way you were writing this story about this roof with this light put out, I need to know about people who know this kind of stuff. He said, so who did you talk to about this? And I said, I looked it up on Google Maps, and I looked at where the street lights were and figured out how much area they'd have to light. He says, you just went and looked this up by yourself on the internet? He says, yes. I said, yes. He says, God, I hate the internet.
I kind of like the fact that it is close enough to the real world that everybody feels vested in it. They already know what's going on. You don't have to describe the castles or the terrain or the planets or the climate. But you also people it with all kinds of bizarre things so that you get away with doing all kinds of other stuff. And since my setup is so absurd because there are werewolves and mummies and vampires and everything just walking around the streets, that it kind of allows you to make some maybe not so subtle social commentary that would not be palatable in other ways. I've got like a mummy who comes in and he's suing to be emancipated from the museum because he's a person, not property. And I have one where there's a mixed race couple. He's a vampire and she's a werewolf. And they're trying to buy a house and they're having trouble. And there's an evil senator who's trying to pass the Unnatural Acts Act, which is trying to stop monsters from having the equal rights. And these two, the werewolf and vampire couple, get arrested and cause a big stir, and they're pulled apart because they're not really married, because marriage is defined as one human man and one human woman. So I can put that stuff in an urban fantasy thing, but if I did it as like a real thing, I would be this boring, soapboxing, militant guy that I don't want to be. I just want to have fun with it. But you can put little things in it like that.